They say the land remembers, that every gust of wind is a whisper from below, a breath rising from the ancient lungs of the earth itself. Let us begin not with a name, not with a date, but with the wind. High above the plains of Anatolia, in what we now call central Turkey, the wind moves like a soft, persistent memory. It doesn't howl, it sighs. It doesn't roar, it lingers. It carries dust from valleys carved by time and flame, and it dances through stone formations that resemble cathedrals of forgotten gods. This is Cappadocia, a land of soft rock and silent mystery, a place where the earth does not rise, it sinks. The surface is a wonder in itself. Towers of stone known as fairy chimneys, sculpted by the twin forces of volcanic fire and gentle erosion. They rise like petrified dreams under a pale Anatolian sun, watching over fields, homes, and small villages that seem half awake, caught somewhere between the ancient and the eternal. But what lies beneath is a different world. Beneath your very feet, beneath those cobbled streets and old village wells, beneath the sandals of wandering monks and the paws of stray dogs, sleeps a secret city. No sunlight has ever reached it. No bird has ever flown through its chambers. And yet it breathes. Derinkuyu. The name means deep well, but the truth is deeper than language. Some say it was discovered by accident in 1963, when a man knocked down a wall in his basement and found more than empty space behind it. Others believe it was never lost, just waiting for the right moment to re-emerge into the light. But tonight, let us not speak of discovery. Tonight, we descend slowly through memory. Close your eyes. Can you feel the stone under your feet? It's cool, silent, as though it has not been touched for centuries. And perhaps it hasn't. The entrance is unassuming. A narrow opening in the floor of an old home. A stone rolled to the side, revealing only darkness. A breath of cold air rising from the depths. Not threatening, not cruel, just ancient. The kind of cold that has seen centuries pass without moving. You begin your descent. The stairs are tight, just wide enough for a single person. Your shoulders brush stone. Your steps echo in a hollow that seems endless. And with every footfall, the world above fades away. No birdsong, no wind, only the hush of your breath, and the silent awe of space that was never meant to hold the sky. Cappadocia is not like other places. It is volcanic, yes, but porous, soft, malleable. The rock here, called tough, is light and pliable, easily carved. It remembers every touch, every tool, every hand that pressed against it in fear or faith. It is in this rock that a civilization once carved not just tunnels, but life itself. Whole rooms, communal kitchens, ventilation shafts stretching over 100 feet, wells that drew water from deep veins of the earth, chambers for sleeping, for worship, for hiding, a city, an entire city buried in the belly of the earth. Some believe Derinkuyu could shelter over 20,000 people. Others claim even more. But who were they? What danger drove them underground? And why so deep? We'll answer those questions in time. For now, all you need to know is this. The darkness of Derinkuyu was not born from fear. It was born from necessity, from resilience, from an ancient understanding that sometimes to survive, one must disappear. That sometimes the safest place is the one the sun cannot reach. So let the wind of Cappadocia fade from your memory now. Let the stone embrace you. Let the silence of the underground wrap around your thoughts like a blanket of old secrets. You are here now, beneath the breath of Cappadocia, where history doesn't speak, it sleeps, and we are only beginning to listen. Not all doors open forward. Some open inward, into the past, into the breathless spaces where memory and silence dwell together. There is something deeply poetic in the way the past returns to us, not in grand moments, but in whispers, in forgotten staircases, in curious accidents, in the quiet cracking of plaster beneath the weight of time. And so it was in the year 1963, in the humble village of Derinkuyu, a man whose name is rarely remembered, perhaps it was Ahmet or Yusuf or something else altogether, stood in his home, renovating what was meant to be a storage room. His children ran in and out of the courtyard. The scent of bread lingered in the air. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary afternoon. He swung his hammer against an old wall. A dull thud, then another, then an emptiness. Behind the stone there was no insulation, no foundation, no hollow for pipes. Only darkness, and the taste of cold air that had not touched lungs in centuries. He called for a lantern. He leaned closer. The air that rushed out wasn't foul, but old. Still, watchful, as if the wall had been holding its breath all these years. And behind it a narrow passage, chiseled, measured, smooth, as though made by hands guided not by accident, but by intention. They say he thought it was a storage chamber, then a cellar, then a tunnel to somewhere else. He had no idea that he had just stepped through the lungs of history, because that stone he broke wasn't just part of his house. It was a door designed not to be opened, but forgotten. You see, Derinkuyu's entrances were built with silence in mind. Some were hidden beneath kitchens, others behind wells or under beds. Each sealed with a circular rolling stone, like a millstone designed to close from within, impenetrable, invisible. A perfect secret. Imagine the mind that designed such things. A mind that feared not just the known threats, invaders, armies, wild weather, but the very idea of being found. To disappear entirely was not just strategy, it was survival. In the days that followed, more villagers gathered. The man returned with tools. With lights, they moved cautiously. Room after room unfolded. Staircases bent and turned like the veins of an ancient body. It was not random. It was deliberate. What they found defied belief. This was no cellar. This was no tunnel. This was a city. Some say the Turkish government stepped in. Others say archaeologists wept when they first entered the lower chambers. And who could blame them? To walk into Derinkuyu is to enter a time that does not belong to clocks. A moment carved into eternity. What is most curious, though, is not just the city itself, but how it stayed hidden for so long. No maps, no whispers among the elders, no children's tales passed down about the place beneath our feet. Just silence, as if the city had erased itself. Not just physically, but from memory. A collective forgetting. Or maybe it wanted to be forgotten. Maybe Derinkuyu, like some ancient creature, chose sleep over spectacle. There is a story among the old Cappadocian families. A quiet superstition, really, that the earth beneath them holds not just history, but intention. That when you knock against the wrong wall, when you descend without invitation, you do not discover the past, you awaken it. And so, on that quiet afternoon in 1963, a man knocked against stone, and history exhaled. The door did not open. It disappeared. It let him in. And perhaps, as we follow his footsteps now, lanterns flickering in the narrow halls, our own world begins to soften, to bend towards something older, quieter, wiser. You're not just walking through stone. You are walking through time, through choice, through necessity, and Derinkuyu has finally remembered you. Imagine a city where the sky has never been seen, where morning and night do not follow the sun, but the breath and silence of those who live within. We live our lives by the sky. We rise with its light. We sleep beneath its stars. We look up for answers, for omens, for comfort. But here, there is no sky. Here in Derinkuyu, we enter a world that has never known blue or clouds or the warmth of midday. A place where time drips slowly down stone walls, where life was carved not toward the heavens, but away from them. And yet, it was a city, a true city, not a simple cave, nor a temporary refuge, nor the lair of hermits seeking solitude, but a place with kitchens and stables, rooms for worship, chambers for the dead, corridors long enough to get lost in, and stairways descending like veins through the very body of the earth. Some say there were up to 18, even 20 levels underground, though only a few are open to us now. But those few are enough to make the soul tremble, because Derinkuyu was not just made to hide. It was made to sustain. Beneath the fields and stone towers of Cappadocia, there once pulsed a second life. One lived in whispers, in shadow, in slow and sacred motion. The ceilings are low, the walls close, the air hangs heavy with the memory of breath. And yet, there is space enough to walk, to gather, to live. Here, in the silence, you can almost hear them. The footsteps of mothers carrying water, the hushed voices of elders sharing prayers, the laughter of children chasing one another between the carved arches of their hidden world. Close your eyes and listen, not with your ears, but with your imagination. Can you hear the echo of daily life in a place without windows? Can you feel the rhythm of a people who made peace with the dark? There is something deeply humbling about their choice, or perhaps their lack of one. For these people, whoever they were, Phrygian, Hittite, Christian, or another name lost to dust, they built downward not in defiance of the surface, but in reverence for survival. The surface had betrayed them, again and again. Warfare, famine, invasion, fire. But below, there was stillness. Below, there was control. Below, there was continuity. And so, they carved not just shelter, but permanence. They made Derinkuyu not as a panic room, not as a tomb, but as a living organism. Ventilation shafts that stretch up to 100 feet allow the air to flow. Wells dug deep into the groundwater meant they never needed to return to the surface for survival. And food, grain, olive oil, dried fruits was stored in niches carved with care. Even animals had their place. In the upper levels, one finds stables. The scent must have been thick, the air warm, the sounds constant. Imagine it. Horses and goats and chickens, their lives bound to human breath, all living in the belly of a mountain. The pulse of existence carried on, not in sunlight, but in strategy. You see, Derinkuyu wasn't a cave. It was a covenant, an agreement between humans and the stone. We will shape you with our hands, and you will keep us safe. We will breathe through you, and you will remember our breath. The further you descend, the more intimate it becomes. The hall's narrow. The light softens. You begin to lose the sense of up. You are no longer underground. You are inside something, inside a mind, a memory, a collective act of faith carved into the bones of the earth. Derinkuyu did not need the sky to be alive. It had its own kind of light, the light of endurance, the light of silence, the light of those who, even in the deepest dark, continued to build and believe. So breathe gently, step softly. This is not just a city without sky. It is a city that chose depth over destruction, stillness over surrender, and whose story, after centuries of sleep, is whispering itself back to us now. Stone does not forget. It listens long after the voices are gone. It holds the weight of memory, not in words, but in touch. We speak so often of what was built in Derinkuyu. The tunnels, the chambers, the secrets that drift through its passages like forgotten prayers. But tonight, let us turn not to what was made, but to what made it possible. Stone, not the kind found in marble palaces, not the proud columns of Rome or the jagged teeth of Egyptian granite. This stone is humble, soft, porous, born from fire, but shaped by silence. It is called tough, a rock formed from the breath of volcanoes. From the ancient eruptions that once scorched this land, centuries before the first hands ever touched it. Tough is not hard like basalt or brittle like shale. It yields to carving, to the pressure of fingertips, to the chisel's curve. It does not resist. It remembers. It is the kind of stone that welcomes you. Perhaps that is why people came here in the first place. To this strange region where the land wears spires like crowns, where fairy chimneys rise like sacred flames frozen mid-dance. They came, and they dug. Not just downward, but inward, into something older than fear, more patient than time. You see, when you touch the walls of Derinkuyu, you do not just feel stone. You feel skin, the skin of the earth, the flesh of fire, cooled and quieted over centuries, now offered as refuge. The tools they used were simple: bronze, iron, hardened wood. And yet, what they carved is nothing short of sacred architecture. Not in grandeur, but in intimacy. Each passage was smoothed by repetition. Each chamber echoed the shape of breath. Each niche and ledge was placed not for beauty, but for survival. Still, there's a kind of beauty in that. A kind that does not seek attention. A kind that hums rather than sings. A kind that endures long after the eyes of the builders have closed forever. The walls speak, if you know how to listen. They speak of hands, hundreds of thousands of hands. Rough with work, steady with purpose. They speak of fear, yes, of invasion, of hiding, of urgency. But they also speak of trust. Trust in the earth. Trust in the stone to hold the shape of their needs. To carry their warmth long after they were gone. There are places where the stone still shows fingerprints. Not literal, no ridges or swirls, but in the curve of a staircase, the tilt of a door frame, the subtle slope of a ceiling carved to guide smoke upward, breath downward. These are not decorations. They are decisions. The decisions of a people who knew they might never see the sky again. And yet they carved, they shaped, they continued. Isn't that, in itself, a kind of worship? Not of gods or stars, but of life itself. To take a darkness and give it form. To make it livable. To make it bear memory. There are places in Derinkuyu where the walls feel warmer. Not from temperature, but from presence. You stand there, and you know, someone stood here before you. Breathed here. Prayed here, wept here, and somehow the stone listened. Stone, after all, is not inert. It is not dead. It is only patient. It records not with ink or sound, but with the slow fidelity of touch. The pressure of fingers gripping the wall during an earthquake. The rhythm of footsteps echoing in tunnels too narrow for two. The scrape of a pot against the floor during a hurried meal. The silence of a family holding its breath while danger passed above. All of it is still here, in the volcanic veins of this forgotten city. So tonight, as you imagine these halls, lit only by flickering oil lamps, remember this. You're not walking through history. You're walking through hands, through choices, through stone that carries the weight of survival and the softness of hope. Every tunnel, every chamber is a whisper in volcanic stone. And if you pause, if you breathe slowly enough, you just might hear it say, I remember. Some names are never written. Some hands never sign their work. And yet, the stone remembers its sculptors, not by title, but by silence. Who built Derinkuyu? It is a question that trembles on the lips of every archaeologist, every wanderer of forgotten places, every dreamer who hears echoes in stone. And the answer drifts like smoke. There is no inscription at the entrance, no tablet left in the dust, no carving that says, "Here we began." Instead, there are only questions, and the questions lead to theories, and the theories lead to shadows. Let us walk through them together, slowly, softly, as though our footsteps might stir something that still sleeps. The mainstream scholars will tell you it was likely the Phrygians, an ancient Indo-European people who ruled this part of Anatolia around the 8th century BCE. They were known for their architecture, their metalwork, their enigmatic mythology. It is believed they possessed the tools, the knowledge, and perhaps the desperation required to dig downward. But was it truly them? The tunnels go deeper, much deeper. Some estimates say that parts of Derinkuyu, at least its earliest passages, may date back to the Hittite Empire or even before. The Hittites, whose tablets sing of gods and storms, ruled the region over 1,000 years earlier. Their knowledge of stonework and defense was legendary. They carve a life beneath the earth not as a temporary refuge, but as a permanent rebirth. This is where the stories begin to shimmer. One tale, passed in whispers among the old families of Kemakli, speaks of the burned sky. That once, long ago, the stars fell in a great rain of fire, and the land turned to poison. Those who stayed above vanished, but those who listened to the earth, who dug into her belly, they survived. Another speaks of watchers, beings from above, not of this world, who sought the children of men. To hide from them, to disappear from their gaze, was salvation. And so the earth opened and took them in. It is said that Derinkuyu is not unique, that there are dozens, perhaps hundreds, of underground cities scattered across Cappadocia, some connected by tunnels miles long, some still sealed. And if that is true, then Derinkuyu is not a mystery. It is a fragment, a single verse in a song lost to time. But what kind of people would undertake such a task? To descend into the dark, to shape it into safety, to sacrifice sunlight for silence. They were not ordinary builders. They were architects of shadow, engineers of the unseen, philosophers of fear, dreamers who believed in the sanctuary of stone. Think of what it takes to dig a tunnel by hand. Now multiply it, layer by layer, room by room, chamber by chamber. No modern equipment, no electricity, no GPS, no satellite, no schematics. Only torchlight and instinct. Only memory and trust. They must have moved like ants, dozens, perhaps hundreds, carving in rhythm, in silence, in knowing. Did they sing while they worked? Did they draw in the dust with their fingers, imagining the runes to come? Did they weep, sometimes, when the weight of what they built became too much? The stone does not answer, but does not deny. It holds the marks, the grooves, the decisions. Every tunnel bends not by accident, but by intention. The air vents placed with precision, the escape routes hidden, the great circular doors carved with foresight and finality. These were not the panicked acts of villagers in flight. These were the works of minds who had seen too much and refused to see more. And so, we call them the builders. But they were more than that. They were guardians of the invisible, students of silence, children of the stone. We may never know their names. We may never find the first chisel or the first prayer, but we walk in their shadows, and their shadows still move. Not with fear, but with a kind of sacred logic, a belief that survival could be shaped, that darkness could be trusted, that the earth, if treated with reverence, would open her arms and let them disappear. They were not running from a world. They were building a new one. And tonight, as you rest in the quiet that lives between each word, may you feel their presence. The architects of shadow, still watching, still listening, still waiting. To descend is not merely to go downward. It is to let go of the sun, to shed the language of the sky, and to remember the older tongue of stone. Every journey inward begins with a breath, but the descent into Derinkuyu begins with a choice. Not a loud one, not heroic or dramatic, but quiet, private, a moment that passes like a shadow across your thoughts. Will I leave the world I know? You stand before a narrow opening in the rock, no wider than your shoulders, barely tall enough for your head. There is no grand staircase, no ceremonial arch, just an opening into dark. And from the very first step, something changes. The sound shifts. Your heartbeat becomes louder. The world above recedes not in noise, but in memory. The stone is close on either side. It is not oppressive, but intimate. You do not walk through it. You merge with it. With each downward step, you pass through a veil. The mind begins to loosen its grip on time. Your breath slows, adjusting to the cool, still air. There are no windows here, no clocks. Just the rhythm of your feet and the echo they leave behind. And if you listen, if you truly listen, you might hear the oldest ritual of all, the ritual of descent. This was not an act of panic. It was a procession, a deliberate crossing from one world to another. Entire families made this walk, mothers with children pressed to their chests, elders leaning on carved walking sticks, farmers with sacks of grain, priests with bundles of incense, each carrying their own fears, each stepping into the unknown with only trust and tradition. Some say the people of Derinkuyu had rehearsed the descent. That drills were held, paths memorized, supplies packed and stowed in silence. So when the warning came, if it came, they would vanish without a sound. But others say it was more than preparation. It was faith, a covenant between people and stone, that when the sun became a threat, when the sky turned against them, the earth would remember. It would open. It would hold them. And so they walked level by level, deeper and deeper, through tunnels no more than a meter wide, twisting like veins, descending like thoughts drifting towards sleep. Each level a letting go of seasons, letting go of time, letting go of stars. At the third level, you begin to lose all sense of direction. The air grows heavier. Light behaves differently, slower, more golden. Not because of magic, but because of memory. By the fifth level, your body has adapted. Your ears hear differently. You begin to speak in whispers. Not because you must, but because it feels right. And somewhere around the seventh, you begin to forget the sky. Not in a frightening way, not in despair, but in surrender. You remember instead the feel of stone on your palms, the smell of earth after centuries of stillness, the echo of your own footfall in a world without wind. And you're not afraid. You are returned, because the descent into Derinkuyu is not just physical. It is psychological, spiritual, symbolic. It is the journey from exposure to protection, from chaos to control, from light, blinding, watchful, dangerous, to shadow, where one can breathe again. Even the air is proof of this design. Derinkuyu's ventilation system is a marvel. Shafts carved with perfect geometry, drawing breath from the surface down through the bowels of the city. You cannot see the outside, but the outside still feeds you. And so, the ritual continues. Step by step, level by level, you shed the noise of the world above, like layers of armor too heavy to carry. You become someone else, someone quieter, slower, more watchful. In a way, it is like death, but not the end. The pause, the cocoon, the sacred in-between. And perhaps that was the point, to create not just a refuge, but a transformation. To walk into Derinkuyu not just to survive, but to become. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavier, and the light in your room softens into amber, imagine the descent, not as a loss, but as a return to the deepest part of you, The oldest part, the part that remembers how to be still, how to breathe in the dark, how to walk without fear, how to listen to the stone and hear it say, "Welcome back." In the deepest dark, even water remembers the light. It waits, not in rivers that run, but in stillness, in patience, in the quiet promise of survival. Beneath the earth, where sunlight never lingers and wind cannot reach, something continues to flow. Not loud, not rushing, not free, but deep, steady, waiting. In Derinkuyu, water is not decoration. It is not ritual. It is necessity. Without it, this underground world would be no more than a tomb. But here, even in the dark, there is life. Let us walk now to one of the oldest places in the labyrinth, the wells. They are narrow, carved with exquisite care. Some plunge as deep as 55 meters, over 180 feet, reaching far beyond the layers of human life, down into the ancient veins of the Anatolian stone. These are not ordinary wells. They do not rely on buckets and guesswork. They are aligned with groundwater channels that were charted, studied, and honored long before the first brick was laid above. Whoever dug these shafts did not stumble upon water. They knew it was there. They felt its presence. They trusted it to rise through the silence and answer their need. Some wells connected to the surface, allowing those below to draw water without ever stepping outside. Others were sealed completely, designed only for those within, a safety measure against siege or betrayal. And so, water flowed in secret, unseen, uncelebrated, but utterly essential. Think of it, a city of thousands hidden beneath the hills, breathing recycled air, growing weary from the weight of shadow. And yet they drink. Not wine, not milk, but water drawn from the ancient sleep of the earth. The water in Derinkuyu was not a luxury. It was the very soul of the city. And perhaps it still is. You can feel it if you listen closely. A dampness in the air that whispers of stone and time. A coolness beneath your fingertips as you trail them along the walls. Even now, in the ruins of what remains, the wells are quiet. They do not bubble. They do not boast. They simply are, as they have always been. They are like memories, hidden, waiting to be drawn, unchanged by time, yet shaped by every hand that ever touched them. And in that water became a careful thing. There was water, stored in carved basins, dripped into jars sealed with cloth and wax, poured carefully, reverently, as though every drop was a prayer. And perhaps it was, because in the ancient world, water was never just water. It was rebirth. It was the breath of gods. It was the silence between stars. In some mythologies, the world itself was born from water. In others, water was the boundary between the living and the dead. But in Derinkuyu, water was neither myth nor metaphor. It was the bridge between worlds. The surface above, with its dangers and violence. The underground below, with its silence and safety. And in between them, the well. A thin line, a sacred line, where earth and sky whispered to one another through stone. Some say the wells were guarded, that only trusted hands could draw from them. That in times of invasion, the entrances were sealed, but the water, always, was preserved. Even as danger roared above, the wells waited. Even as families huddled in the lower chambers, listening for footsteps, the wells waited. Even as generations were born and lived and died beneath the earth, the water flowed, asking nothing, giving everything. It is said that the people of Derinkuyu never let the wells run dry. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because to let the well dry is not just to lose water. It is to break the contract, to forget the sacred link between survival and memory. And so, they honored it. Every drop, Every echo, every moment of cold water against the lip of a clay cup in the middle of eternal night. Tonight, as you breathe slowly, as you feel your own heartbeat echo against the inside of your chest, remember the water that waits. Not just in Derinkuyu, but in you, the quiet strength, the silent stream beneath your surface, the faith that flows even in darkness, even now. Even in the deepest dark, the soul seeks warmth, not through fire alone, but through the rhythm of hunger met with care, through meals whispered into memory, in a world without windows, in a city where no sunrise marks the day and no stars remind you of night. How do you measure time? Not with clocks, not with candles, but with the sound of grain being ground, with the crackle of oil heating in a carved stone hearth, with the soft laughter of a mother preparing lentils in the quiet comfort of ritual. This is Derinkuyu not as fortress, nor as myth, but as home. Let us descend now into its kitchens. They are not grand halls, no marble floors, no high ceilings, no elaborate feasts laid bare. What you find instead are hollowed spaces, rounded and warm. Ovens carved directly into the stone, their bellies still marked with soot from fires long extinguished. Ash that clings to the walls like memory. These kitchens are scattered throughout the upper levels, close to communal rooms and ventilation shafts that carried away smoke and brought in the breath of earth. Their design is not ornamental, but intentional. Function became an act of care, and in that care, there is poetry. Imagine, if you can, a morning in Derinkuyu. There is no light, save for the flicker of oil lamps. But the scent of warmth is already rising. The perfume of cracked wheat simmering, of flatbread baking on hot stone, of herbs crushed between fingers. A woman tends the fire, coaxing flame from coal with slow, steady breath. A child peels garlic in a corner, humming a tune that no one remembers learning, because it has always been sung. Meals in Derinkuyu were not loud. There was no clatter of silver on porcelain, no rows of gleaming cups. There were clay bowls, wooden spoons, stone slabs used again and again, until the curve of each told its own history. And hands that moved with rhythm and reverence. Because food in a place like this was not just fuel. It was a reminder of the world above, the scent of the fields, the memory of sun-warmed grapes, the distant sound of goats in morning fog. Even here, beneath layers of volcanic rock, they found ways to bring the surface back to life. They preserved grains, barley, einkorn wheat, lentils. Dried fruits were stored in sealed jars. Cheeses, cured meats, olives soaked in brine. All kept in niches carved cool and deep into the walls. And in some corners, wine, fermented in silence, sipped in gratitude, not as luxury, but as memory. Imagine families gathering around a shared meal. No dining tables, just a circle warm with bodies held by the curve of the chamber. Children reaching eagerly with calloused fingers. Elders speaking softly, stories wrapped in steam and scent. A mother placing an extra piece of bread before her son, not because he is hungry, but because he is growing. Even underground, hunger speaks the same language. But in Derinkuyu, the meal was also defense. To eat together was to remember that they were not lost. To share bread was to affirm that they had not vanished. To cook was to reclaim time, not in hours or days, but in nourishment. Because to eat is to continue, and to continue is a quiet kind of courage. There is something deeply intimate in these kitchens. The fire still speaks, if you listen. The stone still carries the heat. And in a world where everything else was stripped away, light, seasoned sky, the one thing they could keep, the one thing they could shape with their own hands, was a meal. Simple, warm, enough, Some say the kitchens were also places of prayer, not with altars, but with acts. Every meal, a ritual. Every bite, a blessing. Every quiet feast in the belly of the earth. A whisper that life would not be extinguished. Even here, especially here. So tonight, as you sit in your own stillness, as the hum of modern life fades and your room softens into quiet, close your eyes, breathe deep, and remember the warmth of stone ovens, the scent of lentils, the hush of fire tended by hands long gone. Because Derinkuyu is not just a city of stone. It is a city that fed its people with food, with memory, with the unspoken promise that even in the darkest places, we will gather, we will cook, we will eat, we will live. Some cities are built, others are grown, and some, like this one, are dreamed into being, carved not just from stone, but from fear, foresight, and memory. There's a moment deep within Derinkuyu where the stone no longer feels like stone. It feels like thought. As you move further inward, turning corner after corner, passing beneath arched ceilings and through narrow doorways carved to fit the curve of a shoulder, a strange realization begins to settle in the body. You're no longer walking through a city. You're walking through a mind. Not your own, but the collective mind of a people who understood that survival was not merely about hiding. It was about design, not just physical, but psychological, spiritual, instinctive. Derinkuyu was not haphazard. It was not dug in desperation. It was planned. Every turn, every shaft, every secret passage was shaped with intention, as though the city itself was a living being, folding and unfolding itself, keeping its vital organs deep inside. There are levels so disorienting that even the most experienced explorers admit to losing direction. Passages that double back, rooms that taper into sudden silence, doorways positioned in such a way that you must bow your head to enter, not for convenience, but for protection, for humility. This is not accident. This is strategy. You see, Derinkuyu is a labyrinth, but not the kind meant to trap. It is the kind meant to shield. The outer levels are wide, open, designed for movement. Storage, animals, food, light. But as you descend, things begin to change. Passages become narrower, ceilings lower, visibility drops. It is not meant to welcome strangers. It is meant to confuse them, to exhaust them, to make them doubt the direction they came from. Because this city, this organism, was built in anticipation of threat. Not once, but forever. Imagine the terror of those who carved these spaces, not knowing when danger would come, only that it would. They could not afford complacency. They could not hope for mercy. So they made Derinkuyu into a kind of dream logic, a place where direction is not linear, but cyclical, a spiral of safety. There are false passages that lead nowhere, blind turns that send you back to the beginning, hidden doors camouflaged in shadow, and at the center of it all, silence. The further you go, the quieter it becomes. The deeper levels were not just hard to reach, they were meant to be. This was not just to protect the body, but the soul. To reach the innermost sanctuaries, the places of worship, the places of sleep, the rooms where children and elders were kept. You had to earn your way. You had to know the path. No outsider could simply stumble upon them, because the city itself would deny them. And in this way, Derinkuyu becomes more than a city. It becomes a labyrinth mind, a consciousness, a protector, a memory, one that remembers the footsteps of those who carved it, the fears they carried, the lives they loved, one that responds not to conquest, but to caution. This is not the mind of empire or ambition. It is the mind of survival, clever, quiet, unforgiving. There are no grand monuments here, no shrines built to ego, only space, and silence, and the careful bending of pathways in service of protection. It is said that the Labyrinth of Knossos in Crete was built to contain the Minotaur, a beast so dangerous it required a prison of endless complexity. But Derinkuyu's labyrinth held no monsters. It held families, mothers and fathers, lovers and children, hope hiding. And still, the shape is the same. Because the truth is this: when a world becomes too dangerous, even the innocent must learn how to build mazes, to shield their joy, to guard their fire, to place their lives in the center of a spiral, so that no harm can reach them unless it dares to get lost in the dark. And so, as you walk these halls in your mind tonight, as you trace the curve of these invisible walls, remember that you're not lost. You're inside a memory, a defense, a mind made of stone. And if you feel disoriented, good, you were meant to, because Derinkuyu was never designed to be understood. It was designed to keep you safe. There are doors that open. There are doors that close. And then there are those that vanish entirely, as if the threshold between worlds never existed at all. It is easy to think of Derinkuyu as passive, a place to hide, a shelter, a hushed city carved into the belly of the earth. But it was never passive. Derinkuyu chose what it revealed and what it concealed, and it did so with one of the most mysterious and ingenious inventions in ancient architecture: the great circular stones. You will not find hinges here, no wooden doors that creak with age, no iron gates that clang in warning. Instead, you find silence. You find a hole carved narrow, and beside it, a giant stone, round and solid, as still as a full moon held in place by time. This is no ordinary boulder. It is smooth, deliberate, and impossibly heavy, some way up to 500 kilograms, more than 1,000 pounds of volcanic stone carved into perfect discs. They were not decorative. They were not symbolic. They were final. These circular stones, sometimes called millstones, though they ground no grain, were carved directly into the structure of the city, positioned at key junctures, entrances, exits, passageways between levels. And they were designed for one thing: closure. To roll one of these stones into place was not a casual act. It required strength, coordination, and most importantly, decision. Because once a stone was rolled, there was no going back. No one could lift it alone. No outsider could move it from the other side. No invader could force their way through, unless they brought with them the patience of centuries. Some stones had small holes drilled through their centers, not for hands, but for eyes, or perhaps for spears. A way to see the threat before it saw you. A way to fight without opening. A final breath before the seal. And it is here, in these stones, that we glimpse the most human part of Derinkuyu, the hesitation, because these stones were not made in rage. They were made in fear, and in hope. Fear that the world above would come crashing down again. That enemies, foreign, known, or perhaps other, would descend, bringing fire and cruelty. Hope that by sealing the door, they could wait it out. That the surface would eventually quiet. That they could return. But in the in-between, there was only the stone, and the silence it brought. Imagine the moment. A lookout returns, breathless. There are men coming, or worse, there are horsemen and fire. The family gathers. The lamps are extinguished. The doors are sealed. And finally, with a terrible stillness, the stone is rolled. It slides into place not like thunder, but like a whisper, a hush that says, "We are not here. We were never here. We are stone like the earth. Invisible, forgotten." The room behind the stone becomes a cocoon, no longer part of the world, no longer part of time. The people wait. They listen. They hold their breath, and the stone listens with them. You see, these were not just defense mechanisms. They were rituals. acts of surrender, or perhaps of faith, because to roll the stone was to accept disappearance, to become one with the dark, to trust the labyrinth to hold you, protect you, keep your memory warm. And when the danger passed, if it passed, the stone would be rolled again. Not backward, forward, not to escape, but to emerge. Like waking from a long sleep, like being born from silence. But not all stones were moved again. Some were rolled and never rolled back. Some passageways remained sealed, even now. Lost chambers, forgotten breath. Entire stories paused in permanent stillness. What lies behind them? We do not know. We may never know. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps too much. But the stones remain as guardians, as questions, as echoes. As reminders that Derinkuyu was not simply a city with doors. It was a city that could choose to vanish. And that perhaps is its most sacred power. Because not all safety lies in resistance. Sometimes safety lies in erasure. In stepping into the silence so completely that no one remembers the sound of your name. Only the stone, only the curve of the seal, only the stillness left behind. So tonight, as the world quiets around you and your thoughts begin to slow, imagine that great circular stone, cool to the touch, heavy with meaning, and ask yourself, what do you keep behind the door? What do you roll into place when the noise becomes too much? And what, perhaps, waits behind it? Still breathing? No one builds a city beneath the earth unless they have seen something above it that they cannot unsee. Derinkuyu was not a city of ambition. It was not made for glory nor conquest. It bore no marble arches, no towering statues, no inscriptions carved to honor kings. It was built in silence, for survival, for vanishing, and that tells us something more haunting than any ruin ever could. It tells us there's something to run from. But what? That is the whisper that curls like mist through these halls. You feel it in the way the walls lean slightly inward, as if afraid to stretch too far. You hear it in the echo of footsteps, your own, and wonder how many came before, breathing just as quietly, moving just as cautiously. Historians have theories. They speak of invaders, Arab raids during the Byzantine era, the march of empires, of conflict, of unrest. They mention how Derinkuyu could have served as a sanctuary during times of war, a hiding place for Christians avoiding persecution. All of this is true, but is not the whole truth, because war leaves a mark, burned villages, weapons, graves. Derinkuyu holds none of these above. Instead, it hides all memory of fear within itself, as if fear was the very mortar between its walls. Some say the first people who dug into the stone were not fleeing men, but something older, a presence, a catastrophe, a silence so large it could only be escaped by vanishing into the ground. There is an Anatolian tale passed down in low voices, usually just before bed, when the lamps are dim and the night feels heavier than usual. It speaks of the watchers, tall beings, silent, unblinking, not spirits, not demons, but something in between, something that did not belong to the surface, or perhaps once did before it was cast out. The watchers came, the story says, not to destroy, but to observe, to search, and when they did not find what they were looking for, they turned violent. The people of the land, unable to fight such things, went to the one place the watchers could not follow, below, and thus the descent began. One chamber, then two, then dozens, not out of desire, but out of desperation. Some say Derinkuyu was not the first such city, but the last. That before it, other caves were dug, smaller, rougher, but that each time the people dug deeper, they bought more time, more breath, more sleep, more stories passed to children. Of course, others laugh at this. They say it is fantasy, but even fantasy has roots. And the roots of Derinkuyu grow long and deep. You see, the city was not just about hiding. It was about flight, about retreat as a form of intelligence, about refusal, not surrender. It is a different kind of courage. The courage to become invisible, to let go of pride, to let go of the sky. When we speak of escape, we often imagine it as frantic, chaotic. But Derinkuyu teaches us another kind of flight, the deliberate kind, the kind where you plan your absence. You rehearse your silence. You draw maps of your vanishing, and you pass them down like sacred scripture carved in breath. Even the layout of Derinkuyu tells this story. It is not a city of impulse. It is a city of preparation, a city that expected the worst and survived it not by fighting, but by disappearing before it arrived. And there is something almost spiritual in that. To become nothing, to escape not just danger, but notice, to live in the shadow of myth, rather than the heat of violence. And so they listened to the earth, to their elders, to the wind and the water and the heavy silence that told them when it was time. Time to flee, time to close the door, time to roll the stone, time to vanish. And Derinkuyu became the memory of that choice. It holds the echo of every footstep taken in retreat, every heartbeat stilled beneath stone, every moment of breath held in silence as danger passed just above. Tonight, you do not need to believe in the Watchers. You do not need to name the fear. Only understand it. Understand that something, whatever it was, chased these people underground. And that what they built in response was not a prison, but a sanctuary. A sanctuary carved not from weakness, but from wisdom. A place where the flight was not failure, but freedom. So now, as the night deepens, and the world outside your window fades into hush, let your own fears drift down. Let them find a tunnel. Let them rest behind a circular stone. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to disappear. Some rooms are not made for sleeping, nor for eating, nor for waiting. They are made for remembering what it means to be human and what it means to disappear. There are chambers in Derinkuyu that feel different. Not wider, not brighter, not even more ornate, but quieter. Still, dense with something unseen. When you step into them, whether in waking life or imagination, your breath slows. Your thoughts no longer race. The air feels thicker, older, as if it has been held inside these walls for centuries, waiting to be exhaled again. These are the soul rooms, not because anyone called them that in an inscription. There are no signs here, no labels carved into stone, but because something in them hums. These spaces, larger than sleeping quarters, deeper than kitchens, echoing in strange ways, are believed by some to be sanctuaries, not just for people, but for presence. They are found deeper in the city, past the stables, past the storage, past the living. These are the places of belonging beyond breath. Some archaeologists suggest they were chapels, simple sanctuaries carved by Christian communities who fled persecution in later centuries. Indeed, some of the larger rooms feature niches in the walls, cross-like shapes, even altars carved from the same volcanic stone as everything else. But even before Christianity carved its symbol into these walls, the shape of reverence was already here. The stillness was already here. Because before this place held prayers to the Christian God, it likely held others. Older gods, more ancient devotions, whispers to the sky, long before the sky was left behind. It's not hard to imagine a priest, cloaked not in fine robes, but in ashen memory, raising a lamp in one hand, a bowl of water in the other, speaking softly to the stone. Not for miracles, not for escape, but for guidance, for survival, for peace. These chambers held more than voices. They held vibration. You see, in a world without sunlight, the sacred becomes internal. It lives not in temples with soaring ceilings, but in places that hold you like a womb, where the boundary between the living and the lost becomes almost translucent. And in Derinkuyu, that boundary is everywhere. Some believe that the people gathered here not just to pray, but to mourn, that these chambers served as places to bury their dead, to keep them close, to whisper to them in the stillness, and to feel their presence in the stone. Can you imagine the rituals? A clay lamp flickering, its flame dancing in the damp air. Incense, perhaps myrrh or crushed laurel, rising in thin, trembling spirals. A hand resting on a wall as a name is spoken slowly, once then never again. There is a holiness in that kind of silence. A sacredness not built from marble and gold, but from endurance. Because when the world above collapses, when temples burn, when cities fall, what remains? The soul and the space it leaves behind. That is what these chambers hold. Not dogma, not doctrine, but essence. The human need to name something greater than fear. To say, in the stillest of voices, we are more than hunger, more than hiding. We remember, and so they carved. Not to impress, not to decorate, but to listen. Even now, standing in these rooms, whether in stone or in spirit, you can feel the echo of devotion. The weight of countless eyes looking inward, not outward. Not searching for heaven, but anchoring themselves to earth. This was not just faith. This was intimacy between person and passage, between body and breath, between silence and soul. And in that space, the sacred was preserved. So tonight, as you rest, as the last thoughts of the day soften into silence, close your eyes and picture it. A stone room, no larger than a classroom, rounded at the edges as if the wind itself had shaped it. You step inside, the air holds you, and somewhere in the walls, the memory of a prayer long forgotten still lingers, not in words, but in presence, because the soul does not need to be seen, only held. And here, beneath all things, in a city no sun has touched for millennia, there's still rooms waiting for it. Before there were kings, before there were borders or names, there was the fall. Not from grace, but from light. Not into sin, but into silence. And it did not happen once. It happens still. Every civilization tells a version of the same story. The story of a people who were cast out, who were driven from their land, from their safety, from the world they once knew. Sometimes it is a garden, sometimes a tower, sometimes a sky. We call it exile, but perhaps exile is not just a chapter in history. Perhaps it is something older, something that lives in the bones of the earth, and in the bones of us. There are those who believe Derinkuyu is not just a refuge from war or conquest, not simply a clever answer to a temporary threat, but something much deeper, more primal, more permanent, a monument to an ancient fall, a kind of remembering, preserved in stone, of the first time we fled the light. Some say the city was born in the wake of catastrophe, not political, not human, but cosmic, that the ancestors of those who carved Derinkuyu witnessed something in the sky, a storm not of rain or lightning, but of fire, a meteor perhaps, a solar event, or something even older, something unnamed. And in the burning that followed, they fled not from one another, but from the heavens. They turned away from the stars. They chose not to ascend. They chose to bury themselves, not in defeat, but in defiance. There is a myth, old and half forgotten, from the mountains of Anatolia. It tells of a time when the gods descended not as saviors, but as hunters, when the skies were not blue, but black, when the ground opened And those who were clever, those who were quiet, walked into the belly of the earth and waited. Some returned, some did not. Those who returned carried with them a silence that never fully left. They built with it. They passed it down. They carved it into walls. And perhaps Derinkuyu is one of the places where that silence took shape. Even its structure suggests this. You do not build a city so complete, so intricately prepared for isolation, unless you expect to remain hidden for generations. Unless you remember what it means to lose everything. The wells, the ventilation shafts, the sealed doors, the burial chambers, the chapels, the escape tunnels. They were not made in a hurry. They were not made for a season. They were made for continuity, for exile made permanent. And if that is true, if this city beneath the earth was born from a memory of catastrophe, then it is more than a city. It is a wound, a healed one perhaps, but still tender, still humming with the ache of what was once lost. It is the shape of a civilization that no longer trusted the surface, that no longer looked upward with wonder, but with suspicion, that chose depth over height, stone over sky. And perhaps that is why Derinkuyu feels so familiar. Not because we have lived there, but because we carry our own exiles. We know what it is to be cast out, to lose safety, to build new homes not in joy, but in necessity. And maybe in our quietest moments, we too have longed to go below, to disappear from the noise, the speed, the burning light, to remember what it means to be small, and to make peace with it. Because Derinkuyu was not about conquering fear. It was about cradling it, holding it gently, like a fragile creature that must be kept warm in the dark. And in that act, they survived. They made exile a sanctuary. So tonight, as your thoughts grow softer and the room around you begins to fade, imagine the first exile, not as a punishment, but as a return to the womb of the earth, to the stillness beneath the fire, to a place not of endings, but of waiting, waiting for the light to become kind again, waiting for the world above to remember how to hold us. And in the meantime, we build in silence, in stone, in memory, and we endure. There are those who dreamed not of flying among the stars, but of falling into the earth, not in fear, not in death, but in search of a deeper home, hidden, luminous, and forgotten by the surface. Most people look up when they seek wonder. They study the sky, chart the stars, ask questions of the heavens. But there's another kind of dreamer, one whose gaze does not rise, but descends, not toward the sun, but into shadow. They are the hollow earth dreamers. And for them, places like Derinkuyu are not simply ancient. They are proof that the world beneath our feet is not just layers of rock and molten fire, but chambers, vast, secret, sacred, waiting to be entered. The hollow earth theory, as we call it now, is dismissed by modern science. A curiosity, a fantasy, a relic of Victorian imagination and early mystics. But if you trace its thread far enough back, through stories, through symbols, through whispered traditions, you find something deeper than pseudoscience. You find longing for a place that has not been ruined by greed, a place where silence is pure and time does not decay, a place that remembers us, even when the surface forgets. Derinkuyu, to the hollow earth dreamers, is not just a shelter. It is an entrance, a doorway, a threshold, a sacred scar in the skin of the world, one that suggests, softly but insistently, there is more below, much more, and perhaps there is, because even beyond the theories, beyond the stories of inner suns and subterranean cities of light, there is the undeniable truth of what was carved here. Derinkuyu was not a small experiment. It was a feat of architectural devotion, and it wasn't alone. Dozens of other underground cities, the Cappadocian region, some connected, some silent, some never fully explored. They form a network, a map drawn not in ink, but in absence. Tunnels that stretch between villages. Passages that suggest a civilization with an understanding of space and protection far beyond what we assume of their time. Who were they? Why did they dig? And why did they stop? For the dreamers, the answer is both mystical and poetic. They didn't stop. They simply went deeper. They left no trace because they had no need to. They passed beyond a world of light and record into a realm of quiet knowledge and inner suns. In this dream, the hollow earth is not a hollow fantasy. It is a metaphor made real, a reflection of our most ancient desire to return to the womb of the world, to be held by the planet, not exposed by it. You see, the surface is loud, bright, chaotic. It demands attention. It burns. It forgets. But the earth remembers. It cradles bones for millennia. It keeps seeds sleeping until the rain returns. It carries the weight of forgotten cities and does not complain. To the hollow earth dreamer, Derinkuyu is not a refuge from fear. It is a pathway to peace. Not escapism, but return. Return to a life of rhythm and shadow, of meaning carved in stone, of silence that doesn't crush, but heals. And isn't that what we seek in our own small ways? A place not above us, but within us. A place where we can be quiet without being forgotten, where we can descend and find light in the dark. There is an ancient teaching from the East that the way to reach enlightenment is not by climbing a ladder, but by going inward, deeper. Still, perhaps Derinkuyu is a reflection of that same wisdom, a mirror of the inner labyrinth, a journey not toward escape, but toward essence, toward the deepest part of ourselves. Tonight, as the hush of sleep begins to gather around your body, as your thoughts fold gently inward like petals at dusk, let yourself descend, not in fear, but in dreaming, into the caverns of your own soul, into the places that are still and dark and vast. And remember, some doors open not with a key, but with surrender. And perhaps, just perhaps, the hollow earth is not beneath us, but inside us all along. Fear builds nothing, and yet it built Derinkuyu, not with chaos, but with care, not with destruction, but with design. Because fear, when it survives long enough, becomes something else. It becomes fire. There is a silence in Derinkuyu that cannot be measured. It is not the silence of sleep, nor the silence of peace. It is the silence that follows terror, the silence that lingers after the last scream is buried, after the doors have closed, after the footsteps above have faded. It is the silence of fear endured. We've walked the tunnels. We've touched the stone. We've followed the air shafts and traced the narrow staircases deeper and deeper into shadow. And now we must ask ourselves, not how Derinkuyu was made, but why? What darkness haunted the surface so relentlessly that thousands of people carved their lives into the earth itself? What fire forced a civilization not to rise, but to sink? Fear, but not the momentary kind, not the kind that sparks and fades. This was fear that lingered, fear that taught, fear that remembered, fear that learned how to hold a chisel and draw blueprints in ash. Because the people of Derinkuyu did not just hide. They planned, they prepared, they studied the fire, its rhythms, its hunger, its seasons. They did not run from fear. They built with it. And in doing so, they transformed it. From panic into pattern. From vulnerability into vision. From trembling into architecture. The fear was real. Perhaps it came with soldiers, sharp and loud and unforgiving. Perhaps it came in famine, when the fields cracked and the sky forgot to rain. Perhaps it came with disease, invisible and cruel. Or perhaps it was something older. A myth, a god, a silence in the stars. Whatever it was, the fire followed. Not the kind that warms, not the hearth, but the kind that consumes. Entire villages burned, homes razed, libraries, if they existed, turned to ash. And fire does not ask questions. It simply takes. So they answered with stone. They went down, below the flames, into the belly of the earth, where fire could not follow, where the air was tight and the breath was slow. But life could continue. And there, in that descent, they did something extraordinary. They didn't just escape. They remembered. They remembered what they lost, what the fire took, and they built it again, room by room, level by level, in quiet defiance. The kitchens, the wells, the schools, the sanctuaries, the dead, all carved back into being beneath the reach of flame. Because when fire burns long enough, it does something strange to the soul. It clarifies. It reduces. It makes you decide what you truly need. And in that crucible of necessity, the blueprint of Derinkuyu was born. Not as a grand city, but as a promise. A promise that even if the world above collapsed again, they would not. They would endure. They would feed their children. They would pray. They would wait. And when the fire passed, if it passed, they would emerge not as victims, but as keepers of memory, of silence, of stone. We often think of fear as weakness, as the thing that drives us away from ourselves. But Derinkuyu teaches another truth. Fear, when channeled through wisdom, becomes craft, becomes structure, becomes song carved into stone. So tonight, as the fire of the day fades from your skin, as the glow of your room softens into shadow, feel that quiet within you, that ember of fear you carry. Not loud, not wild, just real. Do not run from it. Let it shape you. Let it teach you where to go. Let it build the rooms you need inside your soul. Because the people of Derinkuyu were not just survivors. They were architects of fear, masons of memory, alchemists who turned fire into future. And in that transformation, they left behind not ruins, but a message, a whisper in the dark. Fear can burn you, or it can carve you into something that endures. The choice is yours. In a city with no sky, laughter still rose like smoke. Light was not absent. It simply lived in smaller things. In the touch of a hand, the warmth of a meal, the game that survived the silence. We have spoken of fear, of fire, of exile, of design, but none of it, none would matter, if not for them, the children, because Derinkuyu was not just a place of hiding. It was a place of becoming. In its deepest corridors, its narrowest chambers, its most silent corners, there were children. Children who had never seen the sun. Children who learned to walk by tracing the curves of stone walls. Children who grew up knowing not streets and rooftops, but staircases and shadows. To them, this city was not a tomb. It was home, and that changes everything. Because where a child lives, wonder follows. Let us imagine now one of those children, a boy perhaps, or a girl. The name does not matter. What matters is the heartbeat. She wakes in the dim glow of an oil lamp. Its flame flickers gently, casting amber shadows across the carved ceiling above her. No windows, no morning light, but she knows the day has begun. She hears her mother kneading dough in the kitchen chamber, the soft rhythm of hand on bread, the muted murmur of others stirring in nearby rooms. She rises barefoot on cool stone. The floor hums with memory. Every step echoes slightly, just enough to feel alive, never enough to feel alone. She passes through a hallway barely wide enough for her shoulders, turns down a path she has memorized since before she could speak. and emerges into a space where other children wait. Some crouch near a pile of small carved stones. Game pieces, perhaps. Others sit in a circle, tracing shapes with their fingers in the dust. They do not speak loudly. Their games are soft, instinctual. Theirs is a joy shaped by quiet. And in this underground world, imagination becomes everything. A carved tunnel becomes a dragon's throat. A round door becomes a magic portal. A basin of water becomes a lake no surface child will ever see. Their sky is made of ceilings. Their stars, oil lamps. Their playground, the labyrinth itself. And they laugh. Oh, how they laugh. Not always loudly, not always freely, but laughter does exist here, even in the dark, especially in the dark, because the miracle of Derinkuyu is not just that people survived. It is that childhood survived, that in the face of everything, loss, exile, silence, these people protected not just their bodies, but the spirit of play. They carved space for it. They made room for laughter in the architecture. They allowed innocence to echo through the corridors. Some of the larger chambers, with flat floors and rounded corners, were likely gathering places. Perhaps they hosted education. Perhaps they served as schools. Imagine the children sitting in rows, eyes wide in the flickering light, listening to stories of the stars they had never seen, of gods whose voices rode the wind above, of ancestors who once walked under open sky. And perhaps they dreamed of that world. But perhaps, too, they were content in this one, because they knew no other, because love was still here, because hands still held theirs, because the stone, though heavy, never betrayed them. Derinkuyu, for the children, was not a monument to fear. It was a sanctuary of curiosity. They learned to count by touching carved ledges, to speak in whispers that carried farther than shouts, to run in careful patterns, always remembering where the turns grew sharp. They grew not despite the darkness, but within it. And perhaps that is the greatest triumph of all. Not the rolling stones, not the depth, not the architecture, but the laughter, the simple, unbreakable truth. That even here, underground, unseen, unknown, a child could smile, a child could grow, a child could hope. And when you hold that truth gently in your hands, you begin to understand. Derinkuyu was not just a city of survival. It was a cradle, a place that said, the future will not be lost. We will keep it warm. We will pass it forward, even in whispers, even in dust, even in the dark. So tonight, as your body grows still, and your thoughts begin to drift like ash on the wind, picture that child, not lost, not afraid, but playing, softly, joyfully, in a city carved from silence, and filled with souls who refuse to let fear steal their light. To live in darkness is not the greatest feat to breathe in it. Gently, endlessly, unseen, is where the miracle begins. In the silence of Derinkuyu, there is something you don't hear. You don't hear coughing, or wheezing, or panic in the lungs. You hear breath, smooth, steady, ancient, because beneath the stone, beneath the fear, beneath the weight of 20 levels and centuries of silence, Derinkuyu still breathes. And that might be its most extraordinary feature. We marvel at the architecture, the planning, the passages and escape routes. But nothing would have endured without air. Let us pause here. Let us go still and listen to the quiet engine that made life possible in a world with no sky. At the heart of Derinkuyu lies a system that defies assumption. 55 ventilation shafts, some over 100 feet deep, were carved into the body of the earth. Not haphazardly, not guessed. They were placed, measured, aligned with the invisible winds of the land above. These shafts are not ornate. They do not announce themselves, but they are sacred, Because in the absence of sunlight, water, and warmth, it is air that matters most. You can go days without food, a lifetime without light, but without air, minutes, maybe less. The builders of Derinkuyu knew this, perhaps not in terms of oxygen and carbon dioxide, but in a wisdom older than science. They understood breath, not as data, but as rhythm, the rhythm of living together, of cooking, whispering, sleeping, dreaming. They carved shafts that reached upward like invisible trees, branches of breath. Some were wide enough for a person to climb, though most were too narrow, too sacred to be used for escape. They were not built for bodies. They were built for spirit. Because what is breath, if not the spirit moving through the body? Imagine a family 5 levels down, a mother cooking, a child sleeping nearby, an elder telling stories in a voice just above a whisper. The air is clean, cool, constant, no smoke lingering in the throat, no stillness becoming suffocation. The lamps burn without choking. The lungs rise and fall like they do above, as if the surface has not been left behind. Because it hasn't, not entirely. The surface is still there. It moves through the city in silence, not as sound, but as breath. That is the brilliance of Derinkuyu. It didn't cut itself off from the world above. It translated it. It invited the essentials of surface life, water, air, fire, and tamed them. Air was the most precious of all, and so the shafts were hidden, protected, kept clean and sacred. Some believe the upper mouths of the shafts were disguised, covered by stones, hidden in courtyards, built into homes that gave no hint of what lay beneath. To breathe in Derinkuyu was to trust the unseen, to believe that something above, some wind, some memory, some invisible grace, was still reaching for you. And this belief was not only practical, it was spiritual, because in every religion, in every myth, breath is sacred. In Hebrew, the word for spirit is ruach, wind, breath, life. In Sanskrit, it is pra. In Greek, pneuma. In Latin, spiritus. Breath is always life. And so, in Derinkuyu, the air shafts are not just engineering. They are devotion. To carve a passage for breath into solid rock, knowing that no one may ever see it, knowing that it may be the only thing standing between life and death. That is faith. That is love. That is architecture as prayer. Even now, if you visit Derinkuyu, you can feel it. A coolness like the touch of a distant hand. Air that has traveled miles through tunnels of silence to reach you. And in that breath, something stirs. Not just memory, not just history, but presence. The presence of all who lived here, all who waited here, all who breathed here. Thousands of lungs rising and falling in the dark. Thousands of dreams shaped in air. Thousands of days marked not by the sun, but by breath itself. So tonight, as you lay in your bed, as your own breath slows and deepens, as the walls around you soften into shadow, think of Derinkuyu, not as a place of stone, but as a living being, a deep-bellied creature carved by memory, held together not by walls, but by breath, a city that knew, if we can still breathe, we are not lost, and neither are you. Even in darkness, the mind continues to wander, and when the body lies still, far beneath the stars, the soul remembers how to dream. We often think of ancient life in terms of what was done, what they built, what they ate, what they wore, how they moved from day to night. But rarely do we ask, what do they dream of? What visions filled the minds of those who slept in Derinkuyu? What shapes moved behind their closed eyes? Deep underground, where the sun could not follow. Because here, in this city carved from silence, where time was not measured by sunlight, but by breath and routine, people still dreamed. They had to. Dreams were the only place they still saw the sky. Imagine it. You're lying on a bed of woven reeds or folded cloth, deep beneath the soil. The air is cool. The walls breathe faintly. Your body is tired, but your spirit begins to rise. There is no window to the stars, but inside your mind, you remember them. Faint constellations your grandmother once described to you. Stars she swore told stories. A hunter, a bird, a wheel of fire turning slowly across the night. You've never seen them, but still you dream them, because stories travel farther than sight. And in places like Derinkuyu, stories become the light. Children, too, dreamed. They dreamed of what lay above. The feeling of warm wind on skin, the rustle of trees, the shimmer of water not held in stone. But also, they dreamed of the earth, their world, of tunnels that twisted like dragons, of secret doors that led to cities beneath cities, of lost chambers waiting to be discovered. In dreams, their home became limitless. In sleep, the stone became sky. And elders, those who remember the surface, those whose eyes once squinted beneath a summer sun, they dreamed differently. They dreamed in color, of fields they once tended, of animals that wandered free, of faces long gone, voices that called across valleys and meadows. In Derinkuyu, dreams were not escape. They were connection to the self, to the world that had been lost, to the one they still hoped to return to. And then there are the dreams shaped by fear. You see, darkness, especially the kind that holds you for years, has its own imagination. It conjures things, the scratching of something unseen, the low echo of voices that aren't there, the feeling that the stone is not just holding you, but watching. In Derinkuyu, those dreams were shared, told in low tones over breakfast, marked not with panic, but curiosity. I dreamt of a door that wouldn't open. I saw a man made of ash, walking through the tunnels. There was light, but it didn't come from the sun. Were they just dreams? Or memories of something deeper? In some cultures, dreams are not personal. They are communal. Messages, warnings, whispers from beneath. And perhaps that is what they were here to. The city listened, and when it slept, it spoke back. But perhaps the most haunting thought is this. What happens to a dream when it is dreamed only in shadow? Does it fade more slowly or shine more brightly? In Derinkuyu, sleep was not just rest. It was a sacred act, a pause in the motion of survival, a return to something more tender, more private. And in that pause, something soft persisted. Hope, longing, imagination. Because no matter how deep you bury the body, the soul still finds a way to rise. Tonight, as your own body settles, and the weight of the day softens across your shoulders, as your breath deepens and the room grows quiet, know this, you too will dream. And somewhere within that dream, perhaps a tunnel will appear. Perhaps a faint echo will lead you downward. Perhaps you will find yourself in a room made of stone, where someone long ago once slept and dreamed just like you. And for a moment, you will meet, across centuries, across silence, across dust. And in that meeting, you'll know, even in the deepest dark, the light of a dream can never be extinguished. It only waits, beneath the dust, for you. Not all maps are drawn on paper. Some are carved into silence, traced by fingers trembling in torchlight, remembered not in lines, but in breath. Derinkuyu is not a place you enter lightly. And once inside, you do not simply stay. You move, you listen, you prepare, because Derinkuyu was never meant to be a fortress that holds forever. It was meant to disappear, and to disappear completely, to vanish not just from view, but from memory. You must be able to escape, quietly, quickly, without leaving a trace. This is the genius of Derinkuyu. Not just the layers, not just the stone, but the map within the map, the unseen path, the hidden rhythm, the architecture of exit. Let us begin not with the escape itself, but with the mindset that built it. The people who carved this city knew that safety is never permanent. Not above, not below. They understood that one day, perhaps suddenly, perhaps slowly, the sanctuary could become a trap, that the same passages which protected them might one day need to be abandoned. And so they built with movement in mind. Derinkuyu is not a static structure. It is fluid, coiled, alive, a labyrinth that can bend around thread, a body that can shift weight, redirect breath, seal wounds, and open veins. To walk through its passages is to walk through strategy. Tunnels narrow at specific points, not by accident, but by design. To slow the outsider, to break momentum, to force confusion. At key junctures, massive circular stones could be rolled into place, blocking a path in one direction, while leaving another silently open behind a wall, a corner, a recess in the rock. There are staircases that seem to lead nowhere, dead ends that, with the right pressure, open to new chambers, low ceilings that force even the most confident invader to bow, to slow, to hesitate. It is not just defense, it is illusion, and hidden within it, beneath the rooms and wells and chapels, there are tunnels that lead out beyond the city, out beyond the village, sometimes as far as 10 kilometers away. These escape routes, narrow and rarely used, are like veins beneath the skin, invisible from the surface, impossible to follow unless you already know them. And that's the point. They were never meant to be discovered, only to be remembered. So how did they remember? Not with maps, not with diagrams on walls, but with story, with ritual, with whispered teachings passed down in the dark. You take 3 turns, then the second stairwell down, past the dry basin. When the stone narrows, place your hand on the left wall. Feel for the groove. Slide. Step. Silence. The path was memorized, taught like a song, not in lyrics, but in rhythm. Children would learn it with games. Elders would rehearse it in the quiet of night. Mothers would whisper it as lullaby. If the doors are sealed, if the lamps go out, follow the cool wind. Because that was the secret. The air itself would lead you. The ventilation shafts were designed to carry breath through the body of the city, but also to guide. Cooler air, fresher air, the scent of olive trees far above. Follow it, and you might find a way, not out to the world you knew, but to a place just far enough to wait, far enough to hide again. And what did they take with them when they ran? Not furniture, not coins, not relics. They took knowledge, memory, children, the future, because Derinkuyu, in its most essential truth, is not just a city of walls. It is a city of movement, built not only to hold, but to release, to open itself in silence and vanish before danger could catch it. And this movement was not just practical, it was spiritual, a belief that survival was not about holding ground, but about knowing when to let it go, about trusting the body to move through the dark, trusting the mind to remember, trusting the soul to follow the breath of the earth back to safety. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, as the dark folds gently around you, and the breath of your own body rises and falls like a secret wind, think of the escape routes, not just in Derinkuyu, but in you, the hidden paths you carry, the instincts that whisper, this way, not yet, wait, because sometimes survival is not about standing firm. It is about moving softly. It is about knowing the way out, before the fire begins, before the silence breaks, before the world above remembers your name. And when that time comes, you do not panic. You do not shout. You walk, one step, then another, and the city opens, and the stone breathes. and you disappear. In the deep earth, where the sun never reaches and the stars cannot find you, there is no morning, no dusk, only breath and the long, unbroken night where the soul must learn to tell its own time. In most places, life is divided by light. Day means action, night means rest. And so we rise, we work, we eat, we sleep by the rhythms of the sky. But in Derinkuyu, there is no sky. There are no shadows that stretch, no golden morning that spills through a window, no blue hour, no fading pink, no silver stars overhead to remind you how far you've come. There is only stone, and in stone, time does not move. It waits, or perhaps it forgets. So how do you live when there is no clock above you? How do you shape your days when there is no sun to pull you forward, and no moon to call you home? This is the quiet mystery of Derinkuyu, the long, endless night that is neither dark nor light, but something in between, a twilight of the soul, a waiting. We imagine ancient life as being ruled by hardship, by urgency. But imagine instead a kind of slowness, a life measured in movement, in ritual, in repetition, a rhythm not driven by bells or hours, but by breath, by hunger, by memory. The lighting was minimal, small oil lamps flickering in alcoves, their flames barely dancing, their glow more amber than gold. People moved carefully, not just because of the narrow paths, but because the body learned to conserve itself. There was no rush. There was no need to be somewhere else. Everything you needed was already here. And so, time became internal. It shifted from the outside world to the inside of the mind. A mother knew it was time to cook not by the sun, but by the sound of her child's stomach. A priest knew it was time to pray not by a bell, but by the stillness of the air. An elder knew night had passed only because his dreams had ended. And yet, there was still a kind of calendar, an invisible one, kept not on parchment, but in memory, in breath, in repetition. A boy lights the lamp. A girl fetches water from the well. The family kneads the bread, together, each evening. Every act becomes a marker, a ritual, a way to anchor the drifting soul. Because in the absence of time, the mind does not collapse. It adapts. And in that adaptation, something beautiful occurs. The external world falls away, and you begin to live entirely within. But let us not pretend this was easy. To live without the sky is to live without reassurance. No light to tell you that you have survived another day. No moon to sing you to sleep. Only the constant hum of stone and the soft, living breath of others beside you. In such a place, memory becomes fragile. Dreams feel real, and the mind, disoriented, softened by shadow, begins to reshape itself. It is said that in Derinkuyu, people age differently, not in body, but in perception, because without the cues of dawn and dusk, a single day could feel like 3, or 1 week like an hour. The body, unable to orient itself, gave up trying, and instead surrendered to stillness, to softness, to the holy blur between now and always. And perhaps that was the gift of Derinkuyu. Not just protection, not just survival, but suspension, a place where time was placed on pause, and life was lived in a sacred hush, where the soul did not hurry, and the body remembered how to be slow. A place that said, you do not need to race forward. You do not need to outrun the world. You are already inside the sanctuary. And here, time does not chase you. So tonight, as the darkness of your own room surrounds you, and your thoughts begin to drift like dust in quiet air, let go of the clock. Let go of the list. Let go of the ticking that tells you how far behind you are. And remember this, there is a place beneath the earth where time has no dominion, where breath is enough, where presence is the only rhythm that matters. And in that place, There is no before, no after, only now, only stillness, only the long, soft night where the soul is allowed to just be. Every city has its mouth, a way in, a way out, a breath taken or a word spoken. But Derinkuyu's mouths, they have been sealed, hidden, swallowed by time itself. We often think of Derinkuyu as an enclosure, a chamber of secrets, a world tucked away from the chaos above. But once it was connected, it spoke to the world, softly in whispers, through narrow passages, disguised doorways, concealed steps beneath kitchens and courtyards. Derinkuyu had many mouths, entrances through which it inhaled life and exhaled its silence. And now, most of them are gone, lost, forgotten, buried not by disaster, but by deliberate forgetting. Because not all walls are built with stone. Some are built with time. The main known entrance to Derinkuyu, what we now call the entrance, is nothing like a gate. There is no grandeur, no archway, just a low, narrow corridor beneath what once was a house. But there were others, so many others. Some say over 600 known surface points once led into the various underground cities of Cappadocia. Entrances beneath homes, entrances inside wells, entrances that opened with the lifting of a flat stone in the floor, so ordinary in appearance that even those who lived above might not know what slept beneath their feet. And Derinkuyu, the deepest, the most mysterious, had its share, mouths through which breath passed, through which people vanished, through which the city listened to the world. And yet, over time, these mouths began to close. Some with stone, some with earth, some with silence. Not all at once. One by one, slowly, carefully. Why would they seal themselves away? Why erase the entrances? Was it fear? Perhaps. Or maybe it was wisdom, because to stay hidden is not the same as being lost. Sometimes, a door must disappear so the people behind it can remain untouched. There is a story told by the villagers of Cappadocia, an old tale, half remembered, that when the final enemy came, whoever they were, whatever name they wore, the elders of Derinkuyu made a choice. They closed the mouths of the city. They buried the known entrances. They rolled the last of the great stone doors shut, and then they whispered the map in a memory. They passed it like a blessing to a chosen few, and the mouths went quiet. 4 generations, until one day in 1963, a man broke a wall in his basement, and the city sighed again. But what are the others? What are the entrances that remain hidden? The forgotten mouths? Some say they still exist, beneath vineyards, inside broken wells, buried in caves now overgrown with moss and time. Entrances no longer marked on any map. Passages that once led into the belly of the earth and now wait, like sleeping eyes, to open again. Archaeologists whisper of tunnels that connect Derinkuyu to other cities. Kaymakli, Oskanak, Matsi. Miles of passage twisting like veins. Have they all been found? Not likely. There are stones that have not been moved in centuries. Caves too dangerous to descend. Corridors blocked with rubble, with intention, with the quiet will to forget. But what if one were to be opened? What if beneath the roots of a tree, behind the wall of a ruin, a single doorway remained? Would it still breathe? Would it still remember the footsteps that once passed through it? Would the city stir after all this time? And then there is the question few dare to ask. Were all the mouths made by people? Or were some already there? Hollow places in the earth, ancient before humanity, waiting to be shaped into shelter? Because Derinkuyu does not always feel like something made. It feels found, remembered, resumed, as if the people who carved it were not building something new, but restoring something ancient, giving new breath to an old body, and sealing it again when the time came. So tonight, as your own home grows still, as the world outside slips into hush. Think of those forgotten mouths, the hidden doors, the sealed corridors, not lost, only quiet, and ask yourself, what doors in your own life have you closed? What passageways have you buried, not in stone, but in memory? And what would it take for you to open them again? Not all doors are meant to stay shut forever. Some are waiting, patient, silent, breathing, just like Derinkuyu. Some places were not built for gods. They were built beneath them. And when you walk through them, even in silence, you bow without knowing why. There are places in the world where the air thickens, not from humidity or dust, but from presence. Something unseen, unnamed, unwritten. You step inside and feel in your chest. A hush that is not emptiness, but expectation. Derinkuyu is such a place, because in the deep where the stone curves in around you, where the ceilings bow low and the silence wraps around your body like a second skin, you begin to feel it. Not fear, not quite reverence, but the unmistakable sense that you are not alone. This is not about gods in the way we often speak of them. Not statues, not temples, not incense offered at golden altars. Derinkuyu has no grand sanctuaries, no towering idols. Its sacred spaces are modest, quiet chambers with smooth walls and humble niches. But perhaps that is the point, because in a city where survival meant invisibility, worship became whisper. It became stillness, not song. And what they worshipped, we do not fully know. Some believe the earliest inhabitants honored forgotten Anatolian deities, spirits of the earth, of the sun, of the wind, gods that came before Olympus, before Scripture, gods that did not demand submission, but silence. Others say it was not gods at all, but forces, stone, breath, fire, shadow, elements so powerful, so inescapable, that to live with them, beneath them, was to acknowledge their divinity. Perhaps the people of Derinkuyu did not believe in gods above, but gods around, gods within. But still the question lingers. Why does Derinkuyu feel so heavy? Not in the body, but in the spirit. Why even now do visitors step lightly, lower their voices, feel a strange urge to whisper prayers they did not know they remembered? It is because this city is a weight not of fear or stone, but of presence, something pressed into the very shape of the chambers, something that watches not with malice, but with memory. You feel it when you stop in a narrow corridor and the echo of your own footstep does not return. You feel it when you sit in a chapel and the walls curve inward like the ribs of a great sleeping beast. You feel it when you breathe deeply and realize the air has been breathed before, by thousands, by ancestors, by souls who never left. And perhaps that is what makes this city sacred. Not gods carved into stone, but the stone becoming the god. Not through command, but through endurance. Because what else can be called divine, if not the thing that holds you, when everything else falls apart? Some say the gods abandoned the surface long ago, that when war, fire, and forgetting spread across the land, they descended into the earth. They slipped into caves, into wells, into the quiet places where no one dared to follow. And they waited. They became stone, dust, echo. And in Derinkuyu, they were not worshipped from below. They were shared. The people lived beside them, ate beside them, prayed in silence, not for miracles, but for one more day of endurance. That was the offering. We remain. We will not rise with blades. We will not build towers. We will carve rooms with our bare hands. And if that is not holy, then what is? So tonight, as you sit with your own quiet, as the night deepens around your skin like water, close your eyes and feel the weight, not burden, but gravity, the gravity of what it means to be held by something larger than understanding, something that does not speak, but listens and remembers. Call it God, call it stone, call it memory, but know this, even in the dark, especially in the dark, you are never alone. Derinkuyu reminds us, the divine does not always come from above. Sometimes it waits below. Some places do not end. They do not break. They do not decay. They simply fall silent. And in that silence, something continues to move, gently like breath, like heartbeat, like a promise never spoken aloud. Derinkuyu is not just a place we visit. It is a place we feel. Beneath the quiet, beneath the dust, beneath the coolness of volcanic stone, there is something else. Not sound, not movement, not light, but to pulse. Faint, steady, present, like something breathing very slowly in its sleep, like a memory that has forgotten it is being remembered, like the ghost of a rhythm that once guided an entire world beneath our own. You notice at the moment you stop moving, you are standing in a chamber, perhaps the 5th level down. The air is still. The silence has a weight. But then, without warning, without effort, you feel it in the soles of your feet, in the skin of your forearm, in the quiet behind your ribs. A subtle thrum, not mechanical, not natural, not even entirely real, but there, as if the city itself is still alive, still thinking, still waiting. And that's when the truth begins to form, not in the mind, but in the body. Derinkuyu is not dead. It has only slowed. You see, a place like this does not truly die. Its breath may quiet. Its people may vanish. Its stories may dissolve into wind. But the shape remains. The intention remains. The pulse remains. Because what is a city if not a body? Walls like ribs. Tunnels like veins. Chambers like lungs. And silence like blood that no longer hurries. Derinkuyu was built to survive, not as a monument, but as a being, one that could fall asleep when no longer needed, one that could wait, not for rediscovery, but for recognition, for someone not just to find it, but to feel it. And now we have. We walk its passages. We light our torches. We whisper in awe, and the city listens. It does not wake all at once, but stirs, because the pulse is not just in the walls. It's in us, in the way our breath slows when we descend, in the way our voices drop into reverence without being told, in the way we hesitate at every curve, not from fear, but from some deep, ancient respect. We have entered the chest of something larger than memory, and we are standing next to its heart, still beating, very, very slowly. Some say Derinkuyu holds energy lines, that the old builders knew how to align the chambers with the lay of the land, the breath of the earth, the song beneath the surface. Others say the stone itself holds emotion, volcanic tough, porous and soft, like skin that remembers every touch. Still others whisper that the city holds no pulse of its own, but mirrors ours, that it is not alive but listening for life, that it awakens only in our presence, and that the deeper you go, the more it becomes clear. You are not in a ruin. You are in a resting body, and it is watching you with eyes made of stone. So what is this pulse? Is it memory? Is it vibration? Is it the echo of those who once lived here, so many, so long, that their rhythm remains etched into the very shape of the place? Or is it something more mysterious, something timeless, a frequency that never stopped humming, even when the last fire went out and the last voice went silent? Tonight, as you sit in stillness, as your own heartbeat becomes louder in the hush of your room, as your breath deepens into the rhythm of sleep, close your eyes and listen, not with your ears, but with your bones, because somewhere far below, in a place carved by hands who no longer need names, a city still breathes. Not because it must, but because it remembers how. And that memory is you. There are places that feel like edges, where the fabric of what we call real begins to fray. And in that fraying, something else begins to show. Something older, quieter, not quite here, not quite gone. There's a question most never dare to ask aloud. What is Derinkuyu really? Not how was it built, not why do they hide, but what is it? Because once you descend far enough, once the surface becomes a faint whisper, once your sense of direction unravels and your breath becomes the only sound you trust, you begin to feel it, the thinning, the lightness, the strange sensation that you're no longer in a place, but in a between light and dark, between past and present, between reality and something softer, something else. The ancients believed in thresholds, that there were certain spaces, not many, where the boundary between worlds became delicate, porous, thin enough that something could pass through. A spirit, a whisper, a memory, a dream. These were sacred places, sometimes feared, sometimes revered. They were not places to build cities. They were places to approach gently, to enter only when invited, to speak softly or not at all. And yet, Derinkuyu is a city, built directly into such a space, which raises a thought, a quiet, unsettling, sacred thought. Perhaps they didn't build it there by accident. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they felt it too. When you stand in one of the deeper chambers, maybe the 10th or 12th level down, something shifts. Time doesn't quite move. Sound doesn't quite echo. Your thoughts don't quite behave. Some visitors have described the feeling as walking inside a memory that isn't yours. Others say it's like dreaming while awake. That reality feels half-woven, like fog you can almost part with your hands. Even modern scientists, when studying deep caves, have documented the effect. The brain begins to slip. The sense of self becomes looser. Your thoughts drift not forward, but inward. And perhaps that's the key, because Derinkuyu is not a gate to another world in the cinematic sense. There are no glowing portals, no ancient machines, no divine voices calling out in thunder. But it is a threshold, a veil, where the known begins to dissolve, and the unknown begins to hum. Softly, consistently, like a voice behind a closed door, saying nothing and everything. Some believe these spaces exist all over the world, hidden beneath temples, beneath mountains, beneath ruins forgotten by even the ruins. In Tibet, they speak of Shambhala, a hidden realm of peace accessible only through sacred understanding. In the Andes, there are whispers of Paititi, a golden city that exists in another layer of being. In Cappadocia, they do not name it so boldly. They do not claim a paradise. They carve their city quietly, and in doing so, opened a door, not one to escape through, but to sense through. What passes through that veil? Dreams, perhaps. The dead, the living who have momentarily slipped. The memories of the land itself. Or maybe nothing at all. Maybe the veil is not about what crosses, but what it changes. Maybe the veil is not a door, but a mirror. And in that mirror, we see ourselves more clearly. Stripped of sunlight, stripped of noise, stripped of time. Just presence, just breath, just the soul waiting. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften, as the boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to blur, as your room becomes a cave of its own, know this: you do not need to reach across the veil. It is already here, in the stillness, in the space between your breath, in the silence you carry in your chest. And just like Derinkuyu, you are more than one world. You are a passage, a depth, a quiet place where something ancient still listens, not waiting to speak, but waiting to be felt. To go beneath is not just to descend. It is to leave something behind. And on the surface, in the wind and ruin, there are stories still burning in ash. We speak so often of what was built below. The tunnels, the chambers, the wells, the walls that held generations in their quiet arms. But we forget to ask, what was left behind? Because Derinkuyu was not the beginning. It was the answer to something that fell, or broke, or burned. And above the city, in the hills of Cappadocia, the land still holds the echo of that loss. Scattered stones, ruins half swallowed by vines, old roads that lead nowhere, hollowed homes carved in a soft rock, their windows gaping like skulls. This is the surface story, not told in firelight, but in ashes. Imagine it. A village once stood here, above Derinkuyu, alive with motion, mothers hanging cloth to dry, children running through dust, fires flickering inside caves carved into the sides of cliffs. And then, something came. Not a single thing, but a pattern of endings. Raids, famine, drought, maybe war, or something older, something harder to name. What we know is this. They began to leave, not with wagons and banners, but with silence, with small steps, with whispers passed from neighbor to neighbor. We go below tonight. What they left behind was not just the physical. It was the familiar, the olive trees, the small shrines by the roadside, the patterns scratched into the plaster of their walls, the seasons, the sky, the graves, because not all the dead could be carried. Not all the memories could be brought. Some had to be surrendered, buried not in ritual, but in speed, in sorrow. The surface became a graveyard of things they could not afford to mourn. And that grief is still in the dust. You feel it when the wind kicks up across the plains. You feel it when you stand on a sunlit hill and realize how quiet the land has become. Not peaceful, hollow, like a song that forgot its last verse. Some archaeologists speak of burn layers, charcoal embedded in soil, scorched ceramics, soot inside abandoned houses. Others dismiss it as coincidence, a wildfire, a forgotten hearth. But we know better. We know that when a people disappear underground, it is never a casual decision. They leave because they must. And what they leave behind is a kind of ghost. Derinkuyu was a womb, a shelter, a rebirth, but the surface was a scar, a place they dared not return to, at least not for a very long time. And even when they did, when the danger passed, when the city above could be rebuilt, something had changed. The land no longer felt like home. It felt like a memory or a warning. They lived again. They farmed. They built. But they never forgot where to run, because ashes, once made, do not disappear. They settle in the cracks of stone, in the roots of trees, in the bones. And perhaps this is the most haunting truth, that every descent into Derinkuyu was also a farewell, not just to the open air, but to a version of life that would not return. The version where the sky was trusted, where the horizon was freedom, where the fire meant warmth, not warning. That world ended, and in its place, they built one in shadow, not lesser, just changed. So tonight, as you sit quietly, as your own past flickers in the corners of your memory, remember the surface, not as a place, but as a chapter, a field of ash where something beautiful once stood, something that had to be let go, so something else could live. You, too, carry your own layers. You, too, have your ruins, your forgotten towns, your burned edges. But below them, if you dare to go, there is still breath. There is still light. Even if it doesn't burn, there is still you, still building, still becoming, still remembering. Not all memories are kept in minds. Some are kept in matter, in walls, in paths, in the way light fades across a chamber that has not seen the sun for 1,000 years. Stone forgets nothing. It does not speak. It does not move. But it remembers. Every touch, every breath, every step taken in fear or hope, every moment passed in prayer or silence. Stone does not need words. It needs only time. And in Derinkuyu, time was not measured in years. It was measured in memory. When you run from war, you take what you can. When you run from famine, you carry your children and your tools. But when you run from the collapse of the known, you carry something deeper. Stories. You carry them in your mind, in your body, in your hands, and eventually, you carve them into the walls around you. You do not write them, because writing can be lost. You do not sing them, because your voice will not always be heard. But you shape them in tunnels that spiral like the dreams you once had, in rooms rounded like the womb, in thresholds low enough to make every passerby bow in humility. Every inch of Derinkuyu is a memory, not a message, not a monument, but a memory carried forward through shape. There are no inscriptions here, no statues, no names, and yet you can feel the presence of those who lived here. Not like ghosts, not like echoes, but like breath still suspended in the air. A mother kneeling beside the fire, grinding grain in a basin worn smooth by decades of motion. A child drawing on the wall with a piece of coal, marking a dream he'll one day forget. An old man sitting in the chapel, not speaking, not praying, just remembering. And in remembering, he adds nothing new, but he keeps what is already there alive. That is what memory does. It does not invent. It preserves. Some believe Derinkuyu was meant to last forever, but perhaps not. Perhaps the people knew it would one day fade, that the lamps would go out, that the doors would stay closed, that the wind above would cover the entrances with dust and vine. But that was never the tragedy. That was the design, because memory does not need to be seen to survive. It only needs to be felt. And stone, in its silence, feels everything. Even now, when you walk through these halls, your presence becomes part of the memory. Your footsteps join the story. Your breath adds weight to the air. You carry nothing in your hands, but the city still receives you, not as an intruder, not as a pilgrim, but as a continuation, because Derinkuyu is not done. It has no ending. It remembers you too, the one who searched for meaning in its shape, the one who wondered what it was like to live in the dark, the one who sat in silence and listened. You are now part of the memory it keeps, not in name, not in stone, but in presence. So tonight, as your body softens into stillness, as your thoughts settle like dust on stone floors, ask yourself, what shape has your memory taken? What have you carved, even without knowing? Because we are all builders. We all leave rooms behind us. We all carry stories that need somewhere to rest. And maybe, just maybe, Derinkuyu is not a place long gone. It is still being built, still being dreamed, still being remembered, one breath at a time, by you. No monument was left, no flag planted, no voice shouted into the wind, but they carved their truth into stone. And though time forgot their names, the earth still holds their message. We were here. There are stories that survive through song, through myth, through books, copied and copied, until the ink becomes prayer. And then there are stories that survive through silence. Stories you do not tell. You build them. You live them. You bury them beneath the world and trust the earth to remember. Derinkuyu is such a story. Not a place, not a city, not even a memory, but a mark left not by warriors or kings, but by people who chose not to vanish. By vanishing, they did not ask for recognition. They did not demand remembrance. They simply endured. And in that endurance, they carved the most sacred phrase known to any human heart. We were here. Look around this city one last time. See the walls, smooth from 1,000 brushing shoulders. See the basins worn by generations of hands. See the doorways that forced even the proud to bow as they entered. There are no plaques, no carvings of glory, no record of victories won. Only presence, only proof. The rooms are empty, and yet full of breath, full of dust, full of the weight that only having lived can leave behind. And that is enough. We ask too much of time. We ask it to remember, to mark, to preserve. But time does not owe us that. It only offers passage. It is we who must leave the signs behind. Not grand, not loud, but honest. And what the people of Derinkuyu left was this. A city that would survive even if the world above burned. A shelter carved not for glory, but for continuity. A place that whispered across centuries. We mattered. We had children. We sang softly. We feared and loved and hoped. And we built something that could outlive all of it. Even grief. Even war. Even forgetting. So what do we do now? Standing at the edge of this story? We close our eyes. We breathe. And we carry it forward. Because to listen, truly listen to a place like this, is to become part of it. You're no longer separate. You are now one of its echoes, one of its keepers. You may never walk its tunnels. You may never touch its stone, but you have felt it, and feeling is enough. As night gathers around you now, as your thoughts begin to float like dust through a tunnel too narrow to stand, let this be your last image. A single room, deep in the belly of the earth. No sound, no flame, only darkness. And something else, something lighter than silence. A memory, not yours, but now also yours, because they were here. And now, so are you.